Part 12. Palms District, 656 Jasmine, 10:11 p.m. The policemen ordered to stake out the entrance to the apartments were discussing the Lakers game when the dispatcher ended the conversation. There was a 211 on Venice Boulevard, and they were the nearest unit. They fired up the black and white cruiser and roared away. The sidewalks were bare of people. Once in a great while a car would pass. And then a man stepped out from the shadows of a eucalyptus tree directly across the street from 656 Jasmine. He had been evaluating his alternatives and was about to move on the security forces in their vehicle when they suddenly sped away, which radically reduced the possibility of target impedance. The Terminator walked across the street and up to the mailboxes. His eyes rested on the box that read G. Ventura/S. Connor. There was a security gate made of half-inch solid wrought iron bars. Penetrable, but the noise was counter-indicated this close to a possibly wary target. In the distance, he could see Sarah Connor's apartment on the second floor. He moved away, circling the building. Tech Noir, 10:12 p.m. Sarah was terrified of going back outside. Her Honda was parked several blocks away on the crowded streets. That man was out there. She faced a wire mesh ticket booth and tried to be heard above the crashing wail of noise and failed. She tried again. "I need to use your phone!" The woman inside leaned her ear up against the grill, her spiky blue hair making her bland features punkish and cruel. This time she heard Sarah and indicated the payphone on a pillar at the rear of the dance floor. Sarah started to move through the turnstile, but the bouncer lumbered up and blocked the way. The ticket woman yelled, "$4.50!" In exasperation, Sarah dug in her purse and then threw the money into the booth. Sarah stepped into the serving area, fringing the dance floor. The wire mesh look was carried out there with the tables and chairs, and the long metal bar, with its steely sheen, added to the design motif of industrial chic, as did the open girder work in the ceiling, which created an erector set ambience. Massive guitar chords massaged her solar plexus as she pushed her way through the writhing humanity. A sweaty 20-year-old with a shaved head lunged out of the shadows, hooked her arm, and tried to pull her onto the dance floor. In the strobing flashes of rainbow-coloured light, she saw his face twisting and deforming into a hackle-raising imitation of a long-dead and picked-clean skull, the eyes so deep in shadow the sockets looked empty. For a half-second she thought a tongue, not unlike Pugsley's, snaked out and jabbed her cheek, then rolled back into his mouth with a leathery snap. She yanked free and staggered back into a table, jarring the half-empty glasses there. She looked back at the 20-year-old. His face had filled out as he stepped into better light. Swallowing her heart again, Sarah continued on towards the payphone. Palms District, 656 Jasmine, 10:14 p.m. Matt was in a stupor, lolling on the balled-up sheets, his body drying in the cool breeze from the partly open sliding glass door at the far end of Ginger's bedroom. The curtains were buffeted by silent breezes. Ginger sat up and gave him a poke. He was out of it. She slipped onto the carpet and donned her robe, found the headphones and the Walkman, and popped in a new tape. As it rewound to the beginning, she padded down the hall in bare feet, gasping as her soles hit the cold kitchen tiles. She went up on her strong toes and hopped in a graceful ballet leap to the refrigerator, opening it. In the benign glow from inside, she assembled lettuce, tomatoes, pickles, mayonnaise, chicken spread, and Bermuda onion on the countertop. She was reaching into the cupboard for the bread when she heard the noise. It seemed to come from everywhere, a soft scraping sound not too far away. Ginger looked around in the pale light, seeing nothing. She groped on the bottom shelf and found the Roman meal bread. Now for the milk. There it was again. Closer now, sharp scraping. And again, closer. Ginger had nerves like titanium. Nothing fazed her. She was curious about the noise, that was all. but a loud clunk hit her ears and chased her heart and lungs all the way up her spinal cord to roost on her head. Then she realized the tape had rewound already and shut itself off, tripping a pop on her headphones. Titanium, all right. Now where did she put the mustard? Ah, up there on top of the... Something streaked at her in the darkness, and Ginger involuntarily yelled. Spice jars clattered over as Pugsley darted off the refrigerator, more startled than Ginger by their unexpected meeting. The iguana scurried along the countertop and brodied onto the tiled floor, then scratched and slid until it propelled itself onto the carpet in the hall and out into the living room, where it could once again be anywhere in the shadows. "Yeah, Pugsley, better watch out," she called, "or I'll make a belt out of you. Stupid lizard." Ginger put a hand to her throat. Wow. Got the old pulse racing there. Nothing like a good jolt of adrenaline to fire up the appetite. Exhaling raggedly, Ginger faced the pile of food and realized that she'd forgotten the Swiss cheese. Bending low to grope for it at the back of the refrigerator behind the coagulated jam and rock-hard peanut butter, Ginger remembered the music and punched it on. Prince and the Revolution thundered in her ears, moving her body with its tight, fast energy. Light was playing in intermittent patterns on Matt's eyelids. The curtains were billowing out in sudden increases of wind. He opened his eyes as the sound of faint clinking started from somewhere at the far end of the room. At first he saw nothing but the ceiling. Then a human shape leaned into view, the big fist raised to strike. There was something that flashed in the hand. Matt's eyes went wide, and he reached down and yanked himself off the bed, just an instant before the fist crashed into the pillow where his head had been. As he staggered back, trying to clear his vision, he saw feathers explode upward as the intruder pulled his hand out of the torn pillow. He had something in that hand, a razor blade or a small knife, or... There were too many feathers coming down in slow motion, like dry snow. He was slightly bigger than Matt, and silent as a snake. Only the clink of the chains on his boots gave him away. Must have come in through the balcony door, Matt thought, even as he spun and instinctively snatched a heavy brass lamp off the bedside table. Knocking away the shade and ripping the cord from the wall socket so that it sang through the air like a whip, he brandished the lamp as if it were a war axe, swinging the base in whizzing arcs. "Don't make me bust you up, man!" Matt yelled. Fear laced the bravado in his voice, a bravado formed more from outrage and adrenaline than courage. Matt looked from the glinting knife to the expressionless eyes and back to the knife. When the intruder took a step towards him, Matt put his 230 pounds behind a Reggie Jackson Homer with the brass lamp. The base caught the shadowy figure full on the temple, and the concussion nearly tore it from Matt's hand. But the other man simply rocked back, as if from a playful slap, and advanced on him. Matt swung again, mightily, but the Terminator simply shot out his arm and caught Matt's wrist in a grip like a sprung bear trap. Matt's view of the room suddenly spun out of control as the Terminator lifted him by his wrist and flung him across the bed to the floor beyond. He rolled like a sack of concrete into a wooden dresser. He came up in a groggy crouch and went for the intruder with a cry of pure rage. Ginger had located the Swiss cheese and was now nibbling on a piece of celery as she piled the snack into a carbohydrate tower of babble. When Prince hit the third chorus of Let's Go Crazy, she held the celery up like a microphone and howled along with him. The man's face was dimly visible. The eyes were dull and lifeless, like a doll's, the jaw unmoving, the mouth a thin, flat line, like the readouts on a medical monitor of a dead man. Matt had the intruder's forearm gripped in both of his hands as he watched the knife descend closer to his throat. It was one of those extendable blade razor knives with the points you can break off when they get dull to make a new blade, except it was extended all the way out, like a straight razor. Matt's muscles bunched and leaped under his skin as he strained with all his strength against the other, but the arm continued to descend, like some piece of hydraulic equipment. Matt had never encountered such strength. Fear roared and howled through him. He slammed his opponent sideways, snapping off the knife blade against the wall, only to be grasped around the throat by immensely powerful hands. Dead man. Gonna be a dead man. Got to break his hold. Matt brought up his kneecap like a catapult, burying it in the intruder's abdomen. The knee sank in with a satisfying thud, but then inexplicably smacked into a wall of muscle so hard it almost shattered Matt's kneecap. Then he was lifted as if he were an infant and tossed through the sliding glass door. He fell flat on his back and sprawled there as the fragments of glass washed over him in tinkly shards. Like a sputtering but still turning engine, Matt heaved himself to his feet. His ruined knee caved in, and he shifted weight to the good one, his pummeled body shiny with sweat and warm blood that came from a dozen lacerations. The Terminator was waiting, watching the man step through the broken window so slowly that he considered leaving the room and continuing his track of the target. Before he actually acted on that option, Matt bunched up his will and made his whole body a fist, then drove himself forward. The Terminator adjusted his position by 8 centimeters and easily deflected the blow. Matt caromed off the Terminator's shoulders into the full-length mirror on the closet door. Glass exploded into his face, and he felt a dozen knives slash his body. He sagged to the floor, fatally wounded, his lungs frozen between breaths, paralyzed by the shock of the blow and the sheer oppressive force of his opponent. The room was running away from Matt, dwindling into a colourless void. A massive weight grew like a reverse black hole in his chest, and Matt knew if he could get past that giant knot of pain, it would be okay. He would be dead. The remembered sound of Ginger's laugh echoed in his fading consciousness like a slowing tape loop, and he barely felt the iron fingers closing out his life. Ginger grabbed the glass of milk and the triple-decker sandwich and adjusted the headphones before leaving the kitchen. As she walked into the hall, she thought she heard a sharp, sudden crunch, as if something were breaking. Pugsley? That lizard was getting positively psychotic. But when she peered into the living room, she saw Pugsley playing statue in the terrarium. Everything looked okay in there. Maybe it was the neighbours having another fight. There it was again. A loud thump, followed by a... Ginger shook her head suddenly, and the headphones slipped onto her shoulders. Now it was quiet. No, someone was... groaning? Ginger smiled with growing excitement. Now what was Matt up to? That adorable little devil. She stood in front of the door to the bedroom, trying to balance the plate on her arm so she could have one hand free to open it, wanting to break in on Matt doing something hopefully lewd. But before she could manage this feat, the door exploded outward and showered her legs with splinters and blood. Matt had just been shoved through it as if he were a battering ram. Ginger dropped the plate and the glass, splashing her legs with the chilled milk. Her hands groped in front of her face in a disconnected undulation, her spread open fingers slicing the air between her eyes and Matt's utterly broken body. Matt was dead. Her Matt was gone. Something in that room had just killed him. She dropped her hands and stopped breathing. A figure strode to the door and looked past the body of his defeated opponent to the girl. The Terminator paused to sharply etch the details of her features in his brain. She fit target configuration. His hand went to the .45 in his coat. He pushed on the door, but it was weighted with Matt's corpse, which was draped over what was left of it. Ginger turned and started to run, the soles of her feet shredding over the broken glass as she put all her weight into a desperate pivot. She didn't feel the hot blood geysering out of the cuts as she lifted her right leg and launched herself down the hall. The Terminator wrenched the door open, tearing it off its hinges, and came into the hall. Ginger sprinted like a champ at full throttle, her lungs pulling in thick clots of air and burning it off for power. She clutched at the living room door frame and careened out of the hall, just as the Terminator was triangulating on her back, lowering the red dot of the laser sight until it crossed her shoulder. And then she was in the other room. There was a volcano of abject terror erupting in Ginger's chest. The door, that was her salvation, she suddenly knew. Not God, not fate, not anything or anyone, but that door, that exit from this vile and cruel sickness that was behind her now. Grinning and aiming that gun and pulling the trigger, and fuck you, I'm almost there! Then Ginger was punched in the back by a rocket ship travelling at the speed of light and vaporizing half of her left lung as it tore through her torso. As she was falling, it seemed as if she would never hit the floor. She heard the sound of the shot that had hit her. Then another missile struck her, this time in the kidney, the thick flesh capturing the bullet and holding it until the momentum won out and it sped forward in a last vicious lunge to lodge in her lower abdomen. Then she hit the floor, and things got worse. The Terminator moved over her like a monument to death. Ginger's hand scrabbled on the cold linoleum. It seemed wet under her as she slid forward. Even though her cheek lay pressed against the inane tile design, she felt an intense falling sensation. She heard heavy boots hit the linoleum floor behind her and stop alongside. She couldn't turn, but the figure loomed in her mind, as black and enigmatic as death itself. Fear vanished, replaced by a huge, outraged question mark. Why? Perhaps the answer would be on the other side. Finally, she hoped it wouldn't be Sarah who found her. The Terminator's finger squeezed the trigger. The hammer drove the pin into the primer cap, igniting the powder. Expanding gases drove the copper and lead projectile down the barrel, simultaneously jacking the next round into the chamber. The trigger was squeezed again, and the cycle repeated. And again, and again, and once more, emptying the pistol.